HVAC 360, episode number 28. My interview with Howard McKew. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of HVAC 360. I'm your host, Matt Nelson. This week I get to talk to Howard McKew, who is the president of Building Smart Software. Howie is a great writer that I've enjoyed reading. If you haven't had a chance to see his work, pick up a copy of Engineered Systems magazine and take a look at it. He's right in the back. One of the things I do every time I get the magazine, I'll flip to the back, I'll read his article first. There's not a lot of articles that really, talk to you talk to you on his level. It's very kind of it's a real special type of writing style, and I really enjoy it quite a bit. So it was really a great honor and privilege to be able to get him on the show, and I won't delay this any further. But let's cut right to the tape. All right, today we're going to be talking with Howard McKew, president of Building Smart Software. How are you doing this morning, Howie?
Great, thank you.
So, I've followed you for quite some time. People who are in the industry and who have read magazines like Engineered Systems may be familiar with Howie just from your writing. I guess my first question is, what is your background? Where do you come from?
Well, the interesting thing is that I didn't really start out to be an engineer, and I talk about this in a book I wrote on managing people in the HVAC industry. When I got out of high school, I didn't want to go on to college. I took a one-year drafting course because I wanted to be an artist, and I knew that if I took drafting, at least I'd have a job and make some money, because most artists starve or wait on tables. And in the decision to get into engineering, it was a one-year course, and the school offered it with the assurance that I'd be able to get a job based on the economy at the time. And two of the interesting offers, one was in engineering in Boston, the other one was in a construction company, actually a roofing company in the next town over. And what interested me at 18 years old was to be in Boston, so my whole decision on where I was going to work was based on working in Boston. It just happened to be an engineering firm. And so I was brought in as a trainee draftsperson, but I really learned to really like the business or love the business, and had some great mentors along the way that just kept me further interested and curious about the building industry.
So
that's kind of how I got into it.
So who would you say influenced you the most in your career?
Well, initially, it was this fellow Jim McGrath, who hired me to join Shushanian Engineering, and then Ed Shushanian himself was a huge influence. I always felt as a boss he had more loyalty in the employees than the employees had in him, and I was one of them because I worked there twice and left twice, both times to continue to learn. And I think that bothered Ed, that he was being a good boss about it. But I was really like the right-hand man to this fellow, Hank Eggett, for the first 8 years, and then working with him. I was the engineering manager, and he was the vice president. He was a huge influence. And then when I moved into the construction side, this fellow, Tony Shaker, taught me an awful lot about construction and business in general. So those are probably the four people. I could certainly list probably another 50 that have had influence in my career, but those are the ones that I think of that really got me going in the right direction and had an interest in what I was doing.
Now, you haven't just been, doing engineering your whole career. I guess, how would you describe your career? if somebody asked you, what you've did and where have you been?
Well, interestingly, Richard Trethewey, who is on This Old House, always likes to kid me that I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, because my first 20 years was in the consultant side, and I started out as a trainee draftsman and worked my way up to being manager engineering, having gone to school at night years later to pick up the engineering I knew I really needed. But then I went to a construction firm, and a mechanical contract in particular, and got involved with design build, and then became vice president of engineering and estimating. And I loved that process, and I did that for 9 years and thought, there's got to be even more to this, so I went to a construction management firm, which was W.A. Berry, and then from there I kind of got back into being a consultant, doing troubleshooting and commissioning and energy work. So my broad experience is that I learned to be a design engineer as well as a construction person and estimator and project manager. The other thing, when I was with a mechanical contractor, which was Balco in Boston, they had a second company that was operation and maintenance, where they were an outsourced firm managing about 24 million square feet of building. And I had the opportunity to be in charge of their technical services, and it was kind of quality control. So I learned an awful lot about operation of buildings and maintenance management. So that kind of rounded off. So I've done design, construction, and operation and maintenance in the process. I don't know how you put a title to that as far as what I do. People still ask me, in fact, one of my bosses at one place, after 2 years, said to me, I still don't understand what you do, which was kind of funny because I was basically bringing in about $2 million worth of consultant services, and because they were strictly with the owners, we were getting paid in a timely manner, and which was foreign to him as a consultant. Usually they go through architects and get paid 120 days later.
Wow. And I think that part of the thing that interests me most about your career is just kind of the diversity and the fact that a lot of people would be an engineer, would get stuck in engineering, and they really wouldn't necessarily grow. And I think that the perspective that you gained, going to the contractor, understanding the maintenance portion of it, really kind of, It's almost like there should be an apprenticeship for HVAC and engineers to understand, okay, what are the other facets of engineering? What do they have to deal with? So when you get back to the drafting board, you really understand, and put together a design that really kind of meets all the needs.
Yeah, exactly, and actually I write about that in my Tomorrow's Environment column, which I just this month finishing up 20 years of writing that, and I always tell people it's sort of my Andy Rooney, what's right and wrong with the building industry. I really touch on a variety of topics over the years, from design to construction to project management to individual professional development, and I've had people contact me and ask me, how can they grow in the business and that, and I'm not really strong on design engineers who will make a life or a career just doing design engineering. I think there's a real flaw in that, and that's why commissioning is so important these days, because engineers seem to just design the jobs and they move on to the next job, and as a result, they're not proactive in the construction phase. And I actually had one engineer who moved into my group when I was doing commissioning say to me after 4 months, and this was a graduate engineer with a registration and 12 years of experience, and he said, I don't know if any of my jobs ever worked. And he was saying that because he was out commissioning and troubleshooting, and it really opened his eyes to, you just don't draw this and then hit the switch and everything's fine. And that's really lacking in the engineering side. And I really do believe engineers, should get out and change jobs, work for a construction company, and learn that side of the business. And I could go on for an hour about that, but I won't. But it's something that I've written about and feel that engineers really need to get out of the office and communicate with the builders and listen to them, because I've always said it. If I had 20 years of designing an HVAC system, I could probably design the perfect piping system. And even so, I feel that way. If I'm working hand in hand with a contractor who's been doing this for 20 years, I got to believe they can make it better. So no matter how good I think my design is, it can be better if you work in partnership with contractors and listen to them, as well as have them listen to you.
Now, just talking about engineering here for a little bit, what were some of the favorite projects that you had when you were designing?
Well, I've had the benefit of a lot of favorite projects. Some people say everybody gets their 15 minutes of fame. I think Andy Warhol mentioned that. I've had more than my 15 minutes of fame, because one of the first major projects that I really enjoyed and was kind of guilty until proven innocent was the Leahy Clinic project in Burlington, Mass., which turned out to be a really great job, but due to a lot of issues from the construction side, that was a challenge. I did the Boston Floating Hospital project, which was fun and interesting, and I created the double-deck dual fan concept, which is I got in the ASHRAE guide in the 1984 handbook. So that was kind of fun and unique. I did the State Transportation Building in Boston, which is about 1 million square feet, and that made Ripley's, believe it or not, because it had no boiler plant. It had thermal storage and operated on the heat recovery taken out of the interior space and put to the exterior to heat the building in the winter. And then as an office building, it would ordinarily around here be, you'd estimate 400 square feet per ton, or in this case, 2,000 tons of cooling. The building actually, on a peak day, was running around 1,200. No, it was designed for 1,200. It was actually running at 600 tons with the thermal storage doing the rest. So that was phenomenal, and it was fun, and it was successful because the facility people bought into it. Two other projects was the Pentagon, where I was involved with commissioning the Pentagon renovation, and got involved with helping to solicit design-build bids based on how I saw design-build for Wedge 2 through 5. So that was a lot of fun to actually put this $3 billion project out to design builders. And then in Ohio, I did a job, St. Augustine Manor in Cleveland, Ohio, that was just really cool because we had a tremendous impact on the improvements of it while it was fully occupied. And I know the Larry Murtaugh, who headed up Catholic Charities Facility Group, was really pleased with it, and it won an ASHRAE Regional Energy Award as part of the success of that project. So I've had some really great success with some real name brand projects, and not many engineers get to do one, never mind some of the ones I've done.
Now, you've kind of alluded to that you've been kind of on the management side of engineering. How do you see the management of engineering? I guess in general.
Well, I think it's somewhat mediocre at best. Managing people, and I wrote this book on it because I was asked to, but you really have to work hard to manage the process and really be a coach, and think of the engineering as the team out on the field. And without getting into all the details of it, I don't see many managers doing that to the level they really should. The other part is, I think project managers, or management from a consultant firm, when they're doing a job, usually they're working for an architect, and whoever has the best communication skills, or maybe they're in charge of HVAC and has the most exposure, they automatically become the project manager. And I learned from working with contractors that you really have to maintain meeting minutes, due dates, assignments, and so forth. And in the engineering side, project management is sort of, oh yeah, we can do that too, and you take care of it, and it's not done really well. Right down to the point where I have a rule of it's called the 24-hour rule, that when you go to a meeting, I don't want you to even come back to the office until you have your meeting minutes done, because if you come back to the office, you get sidetracked, 2-3 days go by, or even a week, and you've missed the opportunity to make sure that everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to do, what they talked about, what they agreed on. And so when you go to the next meeting, no one has the excuse, oh, I didn't see the meeting minutes till today or whatever. So there's a whole task of project management and management in general and engineering that I don't think really exists in most firms. It's, as I say, mediocre at best.
Now, do you think that's because of the size of the firms, or is it just the lack of the lack of knowledge or understanding that, hey, this is something that we should be good at?
It's the lack of knowledge and lack of training. When I was with the construction firm, I remember the vice president saying to me, we were doing a design build project, and he said, I don't really care if this works or not. That's your problem. And he wasn't being sarcastic. It was just that he was telling me, my role is the design part. His role is to get it done on time and in budget. And that was his focus. And he was just reminding me, not that he had to, but he was reminding me that the engineering part as a team, that's your responsibility. But by working with the construction, I learned a lot about what good project management entails, and not that they all are really good at their own jobs doing that. I did learn that, and I don't believe I would have learned that in an engineering firm.
So, moving on to the kind of the contracting, design, build kind of side of things, what do you think most engineers? What are some of the misconceptions people have about contractors?
Well, I think my feeling is most design engineers, first of all, don't appreciate their responsibility on the job, because I think the AIA documents say that you get 80% of your fee in the design phase, and if you manage it correctly, you get the other 20% in construction. So if it takes 6 months to design something, you get 80% of your fee, but it may take 18 months to build it. And if you're managing money, at best you only have 20% of your fee to cover the next 18 months, so you're in a reactive mode. And so, that's an important piece of the pie, and I don't think engineers see that. They just assume that they've done their job, and then it comes down to the contractor just hasn't done their job, and that isn't always the case. And it goes back to that engineer saying, I don't know if any of my projects ever worked, because he wasn't out in the field proactively working to assist in making sure that things starts up smoothly and on time and in budget and so forth. And so I think most engineers, or many engineers, I'll say, don't trust the contractor. On projects that are repeat business, like college, university, healthcare, the contractors are there to make a living and to get more repeat business. They're no different than the engineer looking for repeat business. There is an element of design, bid, build that you do a super job, you're still not going to get the next job unless you're a low price, and that's a kind of a different breed of contractor you're dealing with. But if you're working with a contractor with a good reputation, you can trust them. And at the same time, I think the contractors feel just the same way towards the engineer. They don't have a high regard for the engineer, maybe quite often, because neither one of them are working together well. With the design build, I had the benefit of working for this firm and being put in charge of estimating as well as engineering. And I introduced back in the late 80s what I guess you'd call integrated project delivery now, but we would do infrastructure projects, and when we would put together a design-build proposal for, say, a chiller plant expansion, we didn't have a blank check to just spend lots of time in engineering to get it well documented. In fact, we didn't even have the job. We'd have to scope something out, and I'd get the engineer, the estimator, the project manager, we figured who would be on the job, and even maybe the lead pipe fitter, because we were a mechanical contractor. And we'd do team design and team estimating in a conference room, and we could be done in an hour or 2 hours. And I actually, on one occasion, and it was the St. Augustine Manor project in Cleveland, because the owner was in charge of facilities, but he was not an engineer. He made it clear to me he had a history major for education. What I did was I had someone videotape our estimating exercise as we designed it and estimated this project. And as part of my presentation to the client, we had this video showing how it all came together. And it really helped the client realize, we just weren't throwing numbers. They were talking through, all right, let's see, if we dig this hole, we got to add safing, and so that's $2,000, and we do this, that's $5,000. And you could hear them putting the design together verbally and then putting it to paper. And so there was a much better understanding that we just didn't make this number up. This was put together by several people with a variety of experience and drawn together and to give one price. Now, that usually doesn't happen with construction management or design bid build, but it can happen in design build, and it can certainly happen in the latest project delivery, is integrated project delivery, which is just enhanced design build.
So, I guess one of the things that I can ask you, just as far as get your opinion on this. Who's doing better? Engineers learning how to design well, doing energy efficient buildings, or the building facility managers knowing how to maintain these complex systems for their maximum efficiency?
I personally think it's the facility people, because they have to make it work. The engineers believe it works, but even there, one of the things engineers don't have is internal funding for research. Most innovative designs come from equipment manufacturers who have their own in-house research to come up with a better mousetrap each time. And so then the sales vendors call on the engineers and introduce them to this concept or that concept. So the engineers are drawing from equipment manufacturers for new ideas, more energy efficient ideas, but in the end, it's the owner who's left with the installation, and they have to make it work. And even right now, I'm doing a project working through a law firm that is representing the engineers, because they did a sort of a new HVAC system, and they had some problems with it. And quite honestly, I think it's started with the engineer going on the equipment manufacturer for all the ideas, and then they didn't really understand the system enough, but designed it. And from there, they've built it. And now the owner's stuck with it, and so the owner has to make sure it works right.
So obviously, I guess, give me your opinions, and obviously this is kind of a loaded question for you, but give me your opinions on the design build process.
Well, there's good design build and bad design build. A lot of contractors will say they do design build, and they'll buy the services of an engineer for limited services and put it together to propose something, and then after that, the engineer may not even participate in the project. And then, and I've seen this happen, is then it goes into construction, and for whatever reason, they're trying to cut corners, and the contractor makes changes that the engineer never knew about. That is, to me, isn't design build. Design build is getting everybody in the same room and do, as I said before, team estimating and team design, and that's actually how integrated project delivery is supposed to occur. When I was involved with the Pentagon, and they were asking me, how do we put out design build of wedge 2 through 5? And I said, what you have to do is not solicit bids from the contractor who's going to carry the evil design team, or solicit proposals from the design team who's going to carry the evil contractor. What you have to do is put out a request for proposal that the team comes together, they've worked together, and that they're going to create the scope together, and everybody has ownership into that. And so that's my approach to design build. But I also try to make it design build, operate and maintain, meaning from I've learned from even my own quality control role at an outsourced firm, is that you can put together your operation and maintenance budget in the conceptual phase, and you can begin the training of operations people in that phase by having them give you their input. Because quite often, facility people will tell you, well, we don't operate that way, so we shut the system down at 9 o'clock at night or whatever. And so often there isn't that operation maintenance piece, which is really the sort of you see the tip of the iceberg in these photos, where that's the tip of the iceberg is the design and construction, but 75 or 80% of that iceberg is below the water, and that's really the operation and maintenance role to keep this afloat for years to come. And so design build should really be design build, operation and maintenance. And if you do that and work together and consensus rules, to me there's really little to no risk, because you've got all the right parties working together from the beginning.
Now moving on to commissioning, what is, I guess, I heard you have an analogy for commissioning and testing, adjusting, and balancing, or TAB. What is that analogy?
Well, first of all, commissioning, people will say to me, how do you sell commissioning? And I say, well, I don't sell commissioning, because if you go out and pick your optimum design team and your optimum construction firm, and then you say to me, all right, I want you to commission it, how do I tell them, oh, sure, for $150,000 I'll make it work? Because you already picked people you believe in. But the nature of the business is that these teams aren't working. Some work pretty good, but still don't work as an integrated team. And so the commissioning person is that third party to kind of make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. Not that will solve everything, because I've seen jobs that are commissioned and they really didn't do a great job at it. But the other part of it is, and I always tell people that you got to also include the testing, adjusting, and balancing. And I took the NEBS test back in '93 when I worked with a mechanical contractor. And I really learned a lot about what balances should do. And in each of the major organizations have their own how-to book. But the balances aren't allowed to apply that, because they're working under the mechanical contract, and quite often they're a commodity. And they're also used to, in at least the last 40 years, of showing up near the end of the job, tuning it up and running it, and that isn't how they're supposed to be doing balancing. Without getting into that detail, my point is, when I try to explain to someone who wants to hire me for commissioning, I really push that they also hire me as the balancer, where I'll sub it out to a pre-qualified balancer. And the analogy is, if you go out and buy a car and you ask me to commission it, I'm going to make sure The electric door package works, the CD package works. But as far as the performance of it, on the window sticker, it may say you're going to get 32 miles to the gallon. I tell them, I can commission this at 18 miles to the gallon. I can commission it at 32 miles to the gallon. It's the balancer who really sets up the flows and the pressures so that you achieve the maximum performance. And with energy conservation being so important, and LEED doesn't address this either, but you have these operating budgets or energy simulations that says you're going to use, 70,000 BTUs per square foot per year. But then you don't invest in having someone tune it up to the right flows. You'll get it commissioned, and you'll know that on this sequence, this valve did open when it was supposed to, and this fan did shut down when it was supposed to. But you don't get someone setting up the flows to fine-tune it so that you really do hit 70,000 BTUs per square foot per year. And when I did the state transportation building back in the 70s, that number actually was an average number of operation energy budget for a new building, office building in the 70s at 70,000 BTUs per square foot per year. I designed that for 52,000 BTUs per square foot per year based on thermal storage and this other stuff. In the end, the owner and the facility people, through their commitment to the project and through us commissioning and really making sure the balancing was done, they ran that building at 42 to 45,000 BTUs per square foot per year and have done that, to the best of my knowledge, for the next 20 years that they had it. And so my point is that the balancing should be an integral part of the commissioning if you're going to do it. And I'm pretty adamant, if I'm going to be involved in commissioning, I want the balance to work for me or work for the construction manager, but under my supervision. And yes, it's going to cost you more, but you're already paying for half the balancing, and you're only going to get half the job. For maybe 50 cents a square foot more, you're going to get the thing running on all 8 cylinders, and it's going to be running efficiently.
Now, do you get any like pushback from balancing firms saying, hey, you know what, I want to be the prime here. Why should the commissioning agent be the one to hire the tab? I mean, is there some conflict that you run into?
I don't really get any pushback. Most balancers really aren't very proactive. They're just comfortable working for the mechanical contractors that they work for. Even the 3 major organizations, I tried to push this idea of elevating their role and they seem to think they're doing it anyways. And I have an article, I think, coming out in Engineered Systems in January, talking about third-party tab consulting. The time has come, because I'm surprised that the balancers seem to be pretty comfortable with how they're doing the job, and they don't want to upset the mechanical contractors because then they won't get the work. But in the end, it's the owner you're trying to appease, and so I push for that. And if a balancer can work, I'll say, with me as part of the third party, they're fine with that, and they know they're going to get more money because there's more scope to the balancing that way. But I'm just surprised. I gave a talk a couple of months ago at ASHRAE in the local chapter about this concept, and one of the engineers afterwards said, that was really great, but that ain't going to happen. And I said to him, well, why not? You're the one that writes the balancing spec. You're the one talking to the owner. Why don't you step up and say, look, I want the balancing separate? And it's actually a great business opportunity for engineering firms who are really right now, seems like everybody and their brother's getting into commissioning, so why not also get into air and water balancing? Because for me, it really assures me that the commissioning will be done right because I'm controlling the balancing as well. And I know that we'll get everything done together as a team, whereas it doesn't really happen all that often the other way around.
Now, you say tab consulting. You don't say tab contracting. Is that just a choice of words, or is there an intentional difference there?
Well, because I haven't been able to convince any tab firm. My feeling is it could be a tab firm that sets up a company of one, maybe a limited liability company that has a design engineer who has the role of being the third-party tab person, and then they would bring on the tab firm that they're the parent company, or that maybe they'd still have to go out and solicit bids from 3 pre-qualified tab firms. That's one possibility. The other thing is to have an engineering firm either do it in-house, offering the tab services like they're offering commissioning, or somebody just goes out and sets up a commissioning and tab business on their own. I plan to talk to a few consultant firms about that possibility as well. So you could get it done in a variety of ways, but the bottom line is if you can get the balancer to do the job per their books, then you're going to get a better job, and then the client is going to be satisfied with that, whereas as a rule, they quite often will have complaints.
So you're looking for this third-party tab consultant to be more of a project management kind of person rather than an actual balancer, twisting dials and taking pressures and things like that.
Yeah, and the idea first came to me when I worked for the design build firm, and I took the NEB, the National Environmental Balancing Bureau test, and it was something like a 4 or 5 hour written test, and if you passed it, then you did the field test. And the president of the design build firm didn't want to get into the balancing. We just wanted to understand what they really were supposed to be doing so we could make sure that they would do it right. And so I took the course, and it really opened my eyes to what they're supposed to do long before they show up on the job with their tools. They're supposed to sit down and create system flow diagrams and note every place where they're going to take readings. And I require that as a shop drawing submittal. And that way, when the balancer gets out on the job site, and it seems to make real sense to me that you go out on the job site and you're taking readings. Now, if you're getting something dramatically different, then you would stop and say, well, wait a minute, what's wrong here? Is there a damper closed downstream or whatever? And they don't have to solve it. They can just document it on like a corrective action log and then continue on and then get those things corrected. But if you show up to start doing balancing and you're just looking at drawings and maybe you looked at it before but you didn't write anything down, if you get some readings that don't make sense, you're less apt to realize that, because quite often the balancers, for example, don't have the equipment brochures or submittals out there, or the fan curve or the pump curve. And if you don't, and something isn't making sense, because if you plot it on the fan curve, it wouldn't show up in the right place or anywhere on the fan curve, then there's some problems here. But if you haven't done your homework ahead of time, how good can you do a balancing job?
So, talking a little bit more about your writing, I guess when did that start, and what got you interested in it?
Well, as I say, I started out to be an artist, and interestingly, when I got my draft notice, I took the test and found out I was colorblind, so that kind of killed that. So I went on to doing engineering, and I worked for a firm where I had gone there to learn to do industrial work, sewage treatment, things like that, because I was just curious. Up to that point, I had been doing hospitals and research facilities, and I really wanted to diversify my experience. Well, at this firm, they would pay you a whopping $250 if you got something published, and I think it was my creative genes that got me thinking, because I did this job in I think it was 75, around 1975, and I had the idea of energy conservation through value engineering. And what I did was I designed this school job, HVAC, and I never shared with the architect or anyone what I was doing from an energy conservation standpoint. But energy conservation was a huge issue once the oil embargo took place and so forth. But I used to work part-time for a sheet metal shop, and I learned about how design engineers, if you just go by your ductilator and size stuff and you don't think about the sheet metal waste, it can add to the job and nothing is benefited. So I really did value engineering as I designed the project, and I'd take what I saved, at least in my mind, and introduced an energy wheel and so forth. And that got me going because I then wrote an article on it, and I got it published. And that kind of filled the void as far as creativity. And then from 76 on, I think I wrote at least one article every year in one magazine or another. And since then, I've had pretty much anyone who worked with me in the groups I've been responsible for get published also. I turn it into like a term paper that at the end of the job, you're really the authority on that job. And like myself, I don't write about psychometrics and stuff like that. I'd probably fall asleep trying to do it. I write about case studies and share the ideas, what works and don't work. And I've been doing that ever since. But along the way, Engineered Systems approached me because I wrote a few articles in there, and that's when they asked me about writing my monthly column, which the first one goes back to January 1991. And so it's just become part of my learning process, because when you go to put things down on paper, quite often other things occur. You say, oh, that's why that worked. Whereas if you just keep it up in your head, you're not really dotting the I's, crossing the T's. And so I find writing is really a way for me to continue to learn, and I get other people to do the same thing. And the byproduct is people get to know who you are, and I always say a lot of people think you're smarter because you got published, but all you did was take the time to write about something, particularly a job that you're doing that you're really the authority on. And you're writing to an industry that understands the lingo, whereas you're not trying to write it to a bunch of English teachers or doctors who would say, well, that doesn't make any sense. It's not written correctly or so forth. So I've been doing that, and I continue to do it. And some of my writing I post on my website, and I'm actually writing a book now. I sell chapter by chapter on my website. I'm kind of behind on that because I've just been so busy, but I really enjoy doing that and sharing with others who want to read it, because I've had a lot of emails over the years from people who read my column and so forth, and who said, boy, that was good advice or whatever.
So now you made the stretch into software development. How did that come about?
It was actually my son who, when he got out of college and he got Microsoft certified, and with my creative ideas, I'd say to him, what if we did this electronically? And he could pretty much do anything. He was really, he could sit down and read a book and learn everything you need to know about computers, which a lot of IT people are self-taught. And he's the one that came up with the idea. He said, I can program anything. And he wasn't boasting. His point was that he went on was, but really what I'm doing is I'm programming your experience. And I thought that was pretty cool. And he was the one that came up with the name Building Smart Software, because my thinking was you're building, was the building itself, and you had software. But his look at it was, well, no, you're building smart software, meaning you're creating smart software. And so with the commissioning process, there's really no industry standard on how to write a functional performance test, which is really the heart of commissioning. That's the document that says, here, show me how this sequence works. All the different commissioning organizations, and there's a lot of them, say, yes, you need a commissioning spec, and here's the checklist and so forth. But I had this idea for writing a functional performance test based on how I was taught to design, where you started with a system flow diagram. It doesn't matter whether the unit's 20,000 CFM or 24,000. How does it work? So you do a flow diagram, and you'd write the sequence, and as you do it, you say, oh, okay, I got to put a damper here, I got to put a temperature sensor here. So the Commissioning 3 software that was built is actually based on Visio, which is a Microsoft product, and it's a great software for flow diagrams. So that's kind of the platform. And then you just drag and click the different components, and then there's a taskbar to assign what's it doing for a reaction. Is it on, off, modulating, so forth. So I basically took how you're designing it and had it into a program, and from there I turned around and I sold it out there because I felt it was needed, but as I say, I'm not aware of any software yet that helps you write the functional performance. So in the end, a commissioning engineer might have a 3-page functional performance sheet, and another one for the same job could have 20 pages. And with this, it's a format that's standard that you can use, and each of the people in the group follow that process, so there's a quality control to what you're doing too, because it's very standardized.
Now, I guess what's any new ventures for 2012 for you?
Yeah, I got a really cool idea because I'm on this hospital-associated infection organization. It's a nonprofit organization where the person who started it, his son went into the hospital for an operation, and he was in his 20s, and I don't know the full story, but anyways, he acquired an infection and died. And from that, he has tried to raise awareness to hospital-acquired infection, and so I got involved with it. And I learned, even though I've got years and years of designing hospitals, that almost 100,000 people die from infections they get from the hospital. So I've been on this steering committee, and I've been working with this Dr. Taylor, who has donated her time to this venture too. And this is something like 70 people from around the country, and some really nationally known for infection control and so forth. So it's a great continuing learning process, but I came up with the idea of commissioning of infection control. And I actually am writing about that. I think it's in like February in tomorrow's environment column to get the word out as far as, commissioning started in the HVAC industry in I'll say in the 80s through ASHRAE. Then we got into commissioning electric systems and plumbing and so forth. And then we got into commissioning building envelope. And so I've come up with this idea of commissioning of infection control, which is really a third-party assessment of how infection control is being taken care of. And so I'm working with this Dr. Taylor, who has just opened a business, Taylor Healthcare Commissioning, and the tagline is physician-led consulting. And we hope to expand the commissioning process in the healthcare side to infection control. We've also been approached by a design builder who builds modular healthcare facilities, and one of the things we're talking about is, wouldn't it be really neat if you could build a patient module, just like on the highway you might see a mobile home being brought in a couple of sections and placed on a site. If you bought, say, 100 of these patient rooms and you brought them to the site and you slid them in almost like shoe boxes, and I know that's making it really simple, but before it left the factory, it was certified from a mechanical, electric, and infection control approach. And then once you get it there, you do a second commissioning to be able to say to the client, here, this area of the building has been commissioned from both mechanical, electric, and also for infection control. The other part of that venture is that I want to apply touchscreen capabilities, which has finally caught on. And if you can think about that, as far as if you came into a patient room and you just hit, I'll say, apps for housekeeping, everything you're supposed to do for the housekeeping is right there, and you just check it off. You hit the yes buttons on what you did and didn't do. And that feeds back to some, I'll say, Excel file, but you're monitoring and measuring performance. And then, of course, you need to go out and make sure they just didn't hit compliance with every one of the categories. You spot check it just like you'd spot check someone doing a preventive maintenance work order. So that in the grand scheme for this year, in addition to doing business development and troubleshooting and all the things I do, I'm really going to put a big effort into this commissioning of infection control with Dr. Taylor, and also work on the touchscreen piece. My daughter, Amanda, who writes in engineered systems, works for a firm that is capable of creating those touchscreen applications for maintenance, and also we could create one for infection control. So I think it'd be really fun this year doing that, and I think there's a real need for it, that we could really help clients enhance, in the healthcare side, their performance relative to infection control, because it's not only assessing them third party and then doing some training and recommendations, it's that ongoing monitoring and measuring capability. And today versus 10 years ago, everybody's used to these little handheld devices, and so I don't think it's a stretch to get people to just use those in a hospital. And if they're not, you'll know it quick enough when you start looking at the records and seeing that whoever was supposed to be doing something in a particular room using the touchscreen template that came up, and they didn't do it, you just go to them and find out, why aren't you following our procedures? So that's my new venture this year.
Fascinating. Well, you know what? I appreciate your time. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what would be the easiest way to do that?
Well, they can get me through my email address, which is hmckew@bss-consultant.com. But also, my business phone is 978-857-4079. And I do get calls on a regular basis and emails through the writing and lecturing and seminars and things like that I give. And I really enjoy it because I continue to learn through that process. And people say, well, when are you going to retire? And I think, gosh, I got too much to do right now. I am reducing my hours to enjoy other things, but there's an awful lot of exciting stuff out there that, I want to be part of.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate your time joining us here, and I just thank you. It's been an honor to be able to talk with you, and I know you're an inspiration not only to me but to a bunch of different engineers.
Well, thank you. I enjoy what I'm doing, so it's fun.
All right, and we're back. Thanks again to Howie for taking the time to talk with us, and I really appreciate it. I think a lot of the things that Howie said, and I really appreciate his perspective because he really does have that wide range. From the design side to the contracting and maintenance side, he really is able to get that clear field of vision all across our industry. So that's the great perspective that Howie really brings in my mind. I like to reiterate his 24-hour rule. So often you find that you get distracted by things when you get back to the office. Whether it's and he said pretty much field report for meeting minutes, but I'll extend that to field reports as well. You want to be able to capture everything immediately. After you leave the field, give yourself a little extra time. do it early in the morning, whatever you have to do, but get that out of the way, get it back into the hands of people that need to review it, that need to see it, so everybody can have a chance to say, oh, yeah, that happened, or no, that didn't happen. If you wait until right before the next meeting or the next site visit, or even worse, even later than that, when you're trying to wrap up a report, it doesn't come off. And if people see that and say, why didn't I know about it? When you saw it, it really is something that covers your back. It's a good habit to get into. And since this is the New Year's episode, if you're actually listening to it in order on time. It's one of the things that you should probably resolve to do is whatever documentation that you need to do that's time sensitive, whether it's documenting a meeting or documenting a site visit, do that right away. Use Howie's 24-hour rule and get that accomplished. I also like his different ways of thinking. Especially the integration with the testing and balancing contractor. I think that's a great concept. In addition to the others, so that's some excellent information. Again, I'm going to post some of the contact information that he gave on the blog. So if you can go to www. Actually, I really don't need to say that anymore. I know, but if you go to buildingx.co, that is the blog, and you'll see that. The episode posted there, and in the show notes I'm going to include some of the contact information for Howie so you can get a hold of him, and that is that. So if you want to get a hold of me, you can always do that at matt@buildingx.co. That's one way. You can also follow me on Twitter at buildingx, or you can just look me up and connect with me on LinkedIn. So I think my public profile is Matt Nelson PE. And that is my public profile. So, all right. Well, without further ado, we're going to close this off, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, share it with a friend. If you have any comments or feedbacks or any things that you'd like to hear on future shows, let me know as well. I'd love to hear that. So thank you, each and every one of you, for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope this is beneficial to you, and I certainly enjoy doing it from week to week. So enjoy the upcoming week, and we will talk to you later. And remember, know what you build, and share what you know.